Our first song this morning is In the Temple of Isis, written by Swami Kriyananda, and Isis is one of the forms of Divine Mother.
Still your mind if you want to pray. Send all cares far away. Sing then, love's ever near. Isis comes, await the day. Isis comes, await the day. Mother comes, await the day. Send all cares far away. Isis comes, await the day. Mother comes, await the day. Still your heart if you want to pray. Send all cares far away. Sing then, love's ever near. Isis comes, await the day. Isis comes, await the day. Mother comes, await the day. Still your heart if you want to pray. Send all cares far away. Sing then, love's ever near. Isis comes, await the day. Isis comes, await the day. Mother comes, await the day. Still your soul if you want to stay. 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 If you want to soul if you want to soul if you want to soul if you want to pray. Isis comes, await the day. Isis comes, await the day. Mother comes, await the day.
Good morning and welcome to everyone on this holiday weekend. For those who don't know us, my name is Nayaswami Anandi, and this is Nayaswami Bharat. And we'll begin this morning with a reading from Rays of the One Light. This is a book of weekly commentaries of parallel passages from the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita, written by Swami Kriyananda. This week's reading is called Ego, Friend or Foe. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Jesus Christ begins his Beatitudes with the words, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." To be poor in spirit in such a way as to merit the kingdom of heaven doesn't mean to be poor-spirited. Rather, it means to see oneself as owning nothing, since all belongs to God. for all is a manifestation of his consciousness. St. John of the Cross wrote, "If you would own everything, seek to own nothing. That which the ego relinquishes, offering it up to soul consciousness, is reclaimed forever in cosmic consciousness. Nothing is ever lost." Paramahansa Yogananda tells the story in Autobiography of a Yogi of the levitating saint, Baduri Mahashaya. "Master," said a disciple of this saint once ardently, "you are wonderful. You have renounced riches and comforts to seek God and teach us wisdom." It was well known that Baduri Mahashaya had forsaken great family wealth in his early childhood, when single-mindedly he entered the yogic path. "You are reversing the case." The saint's face held mild rebuke. "I have left a few paltry rupees, a few petty pleasures, for a cosmic empire of endless bliss. How then have I denied myself anything? I know the joy of sharing the treasure. Is that a sacrifice? The short-sighted worldly folk are verily the real renunciates. They relinquish an unparalleled divine possession for a poor handful of earthly toys." The Bhagavad Gita in the 3rd chapter states, "All things are everywhere by nature wrought, in interaction of the qualities. The fool, cheated by self, thinks, 'This I did, and that I wrought.' But ah, thou strong-armed prince, a better lessoned mind, knowing the play of visible things within the world of sense, and how the qualities must qualify, standeth aloof even from his acts. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind." Om, Om, Om.
Good morning. I'd like to read from Whispers from Eternity. Demand not to be enslaved by the ego or by ego-centered passivity. I want to use my own will, but guide it ever, Father, towards the golden paradise of all fulfillment. For I would be infinity's smiling child, confident of being in prison no longer, behind bars of fruitless desire and withered hopes. I would break the shameful cords of lethargy that have presumed to hold me, and step fiercely into freedom. Released, I now blaze my way through forests of every limitation and delusion. Oh, my little vain ego may strut, proudly saying, "Behold my glory, worship me." But I will look through its transparent form, and behold thine unimaginable beauty, clothed in the subtle form of the whole universe. The silent tune hearing of my soul will ignore that tiny, boasting masquerader, my little self impersonating thee, and I will listen to the wind-borne fragrant music of thine own matchless voice, whispering across the ages, "I am he." Well, I feel just that poem is our Sunday service, but I'll talk anyway. The theme of our service is ego, friend or foe. And there's an amusing story about Teddy Roosevelt. He had a very, very big energy. Even his own son said about Teddy Roosevelt that my father always wanted to be at the center of attention, and he wanted to be the bride at every funeral and the corpse at every funeral. Oh, excuse me. I think you all got the point, whether I... Well, there was... Teddy Roosevelt was just finishing his term in the presidency, and he heard that there was a very famous big game hunter that was from England that was in the United States. And Teddy had a hunting trip planned in Africa, so he thought he would invite the distinguished visitor to the White House. And so he came, and he was with Teddy for 2 hours, and after about 2 hours, he sort of staggered out of his meeting and the Oval Office, and the reporter said, "Well, what did you tell the president?" And the wearied visitor said, "My name." Teddy had been talking the whole time, and I was, you can. It's said that he who runs after the world runs away from. He who runs away from the world runs after. And I was just thinking of that attitude of if the ego always draws everything to itself, and how can it learn anything? Because it's always weighing things from its own little perspective. Swami Kriyananda speaks so beautifully about discipleship. You know, in the purification ceremony, one of the lines of the Master is, "Open yourself to me, and I will enter and take charge of your heart and life." Well, Master was talking about his greatest disciple, Rajarsi Janakananda, and people always asked him, why was he able to progress so deeply and so fast? Why was he the most advanced of your disciples? And he said that Rajarsi knew how to listen. He was quiet. He was still inside. Swami Kriyananda says that discipleship helps you to be open to all life, to a tree. You just have this openness. And so as a soul, we expand our consciousness and we become bigger. And it's only through that stillness is that possible. Swami Kriyananda said that in listening to Om, it draws true friends from a distance. And he also said that actually, it was Paramahansa Yogananda that said that if you align yourself with someone who is acting from their own will rather than divine will, it's very weakening to the soul. And people just instinctively withdraw when somebody is coming from a place of ego, aren't they? We just pull back, and because it feels unclean. But when there's a purity of sharing with someone, it's just the heart is just very open, and it can enjoy the resonance with another soul and the divinity that we share. I had a very interesting experience. I went to East Germany in 1989, and I think it was the year right after the wall had been turned down, the Berlin and the West German wall had been torn down. And I did a program on the Polish border with East Germany. And there was a man there named Franz, and at the program, and just a very magnetic person. I walked in the room and I saw him, and I was just so drawn to him. And he was from East Germany, and we were walking back at the end of a session, and he said, "I had heard about your book, Sharing Nature with Children, in 1981, but it took me 6 years to find a copy of the book." And then I read the book, and I said to myself, I want him to come to my house and have dinner. And this was before the wall was down. He had no idea. And he said, when I was a young boy, 8 years old, I was very attracted to America. And I wrote a letter to a pen pal in the United States. But my father saw his return message, and he tore it up, and he said, "You can't be writing to a capitalist." But he had that dream of just his whole life. Well, 2 years later, I did have dinner at his house, and he sort of managed a whole region, a conservation area in the former eastern area. But I was just thinking how, we've seen this at Ananda. We have these friends from all over the world, people who live here, or people who visit, or just are in tune with us. And it's the soul meeting the soul with each other, and life just becomes more and more beautiful on that level when there's no self-affirmation. That just creates barriers that separate us from everything. I sometimes God gives us experiences that teach us the truth. We aren't at a place where we're always living in that truth, but He's trying to show us the importance of a principle. And I had taken some friends up hiking to an area that a lot of people go to, Grouse Ridge, and there was a lot of snow on the ground. And as I left my friends, two Englishmen, up on the mountain, and I started walking down, and I took the wrong ridge over because everything looked different in the snow. And it wasn't until I got too far down and the light was falling that I realized I couldn't make it back to my car, and I had to keep going in the direction that I was going. And I wanted to get out of the snow in case I had to sleep overnight on the ground. And so I just kept walking and walking. And but I just thought, well, God, it's in your hands. And I really started to feel that, and I just didn't know what was going to happen. I knew that nothing really bad would happen. There's a beautiful story of Daniel Boone. They asked him, have you ever been lost in the wilderness? He was the famous American explorer, and he said, no, I've never been lost. I've been a mite bewildered for a week or two, but I've never been lost. He knew which way the Mississippi River was. Well, for the devotee, our Mississippi River is God, isn't it? And that we know that if we have God with us, that's all that matters. Well, I finally came down to a lake that I had never seen before, and the light was falling. It was very, very... it was just a few minutes, really, before it was pitch black, and there was a boat out in the lake. But by this time, I was feeling just so calm and just with God that I didn't want to shout because I felt that would disturb the serenity that I was in. But it was important to find out where I was because my car, I figured, was 14 miles away later. So I kept walking around to the dam, and there was a man sitting on the cove just about 40 feet across. And I asked him, well, what lake is this? I didn't have to speak very loud. I was close enough. And he thought that was very interesting. The men getting to be dark didn't know where he was. And so he said that it's Lake Spalding. And so I walked around the cove. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to go outside of myself because I was with God. And so I walked around. By the time I got to the little dam, it was pitch black, and I was walking, shuffling with my feet. And there were three fishermen. Two had gone on ahead, and another one just had stopped in the trail. And I heard this voice speak out of the darkness just a few feet away from me. Why don't you know where you are? Or why didn't you know? I knew where I was then. And I explained that, well, I had left my car up at Grouse Ridge, but I didn't say anything more. And so he said, well, we'll take you. Well, I got into the car, and there were two other, they were all Christians of a pretty more focused, you might say fundamentalist sect. And so I was in the car, and they were discussing whether they would take me up to my car 14 miles away. It was about 9:30 at night, maybe later. And I was just, Master said that if we can get rid of all thoughts of the body, all thoughts, and if our likes and dislikes, we'll be immediately in the self. And he said that when we live in the presence, then that's when we have God fully. And it was so enjoyable. I I wish I lived this way all the time during that moment. But it was just so much, I was just feeling such joy in God that it didn't matter to me whether I got a ride to the car. I was sort of afraid that if I did, that the joy I was feeling with God would be over. And so that was what's more important. Swami was talking about a very, very deep meditation he had when he first came to Yogananda. And he just said the whole world could be burned up, and it just wouldn't matter. Well, because the most important thing is that bliss, the bliss of the soul. And so they discussed whether they would take me or not, and I was just very free on whatever they decided. And then they decided that they would. And then they took me up to the car. And it was a very, very good lesson for me, one that I've tried to attune to at different times. I've been known to become impatient at times, but to just realize that where our freedom really lies. It's just, Swami said that we should get to a point in our life where we have no likes and dislikes, no personal preference about anything. If everything is God, if everything comes to us from God, then what is there to complain about? And in that freedom, we immediately, Master says, we have God. In our reading today, Swami Kriyananda quoted Saint John of the Cross, saying that if you seek to own everything. Oh, see, I have it written down here. I think I don't want to make two mistakes in my Sunday service. If you would own everything, seek to own nothing. And I found on the internet a few months ago a beautiful story about John the Romanian. And he was one of an Orthodox Christian ascetic, and he lived in the forest in Romania. And there was this abbot who was traveling from one monastery through the forest to another monastery. And just out of seemingly nowhere, St. John just appeared before this abbot. And he knew the abbot's name and gave him some counsel. And then he said, "Oh, that monastery you're going to, I often go to pray there, but nobody sees me." And then he asked a favor of the abbot. He said, "Could you bring me some paper and a kilogram of ink?" And he said, "But what will you write with?" And he said, "Oh, God gives me everything. I'll just use the little tips of the branches for my pens." And he said, "Well, can I bring you some food? Maybe some dried bread or other food?" And he said, "Oh, no. I just live, God gives me everything." And later he found out that he lives by divine mana, just the cosmic current. He was a breatharian. And he said, "Well, don't you get cold in the winter?" And he said, "Oh, no, God gives me everything." And then that brother appeared to him 2 other times. And this took place in the late 40s and 1950s. And it's such a beautiful story. We know how Babaji lives. He lives that way. And it's not our everyday experience, but it's an everyday truth. And we aren't on the material path, we're on the spiritual path, the path of spirit. And the more and more that we really feel and draw on that God is our one reality, that only He exists, the more and more we're able to be more in attunement with His presence, with His reality. There was a saint who said that the devotee needs to do 2 things. One is to deny the little self, and the other is to identify with and assert the real self. And there's so many beautiful stories of Swami Kriyananda and how he has denied the little self when after many years of forming Ananda and building Ananda, he was walking by the monastery up at Ayodhya, and there were the little trailers with little lamps, and people. It was in the evening, and people were meditating, and it's such a beautiful life all over Ananda. But just that was a very poignant moment, the stillness of dusk. And Swami said, heard himself say, "I did a good thing." And then he asked himself, "Do I like that thought? No, it makes me feel small." And this is, something that he had just worked so hard to create for Master, but he's always felt that everything he does, it's God. It's not me. It's Master. That's the true power behind everything. Swami Kriyananda was talking about in deep meditation, even the thought that we are meditating is enough to take us out of that deep meditation. So even the thought that we are an individual being, an entity, is enough, of course, to separate us from God. Because instead of the vastness of infinity, we're identifying with one little portion of matter. That's it. Well, the first temple burned down, and Swami was praying to Master. He had it was such an effort to build the first meditation temple here at Ananda. It was up at the meditation retreat, and he was just saying to Yogananda, "This is all yours. This is all for you." And Swami felt filled with such bliss that he said to Master, "Well, why don't you take the common dome too?" Because that's what's really important. We're a soul of bliss, and to when we feel that, that's all we want. Swami was once at a conference in British Columbia, and it was during the 70s. That was during a time of, just a sort of democratic, everybody is equal period of time. And Swami was on a panel with other speakers. And somebody at one point said, "Why don't you let the people in the crowd speak?" And Swami just in a common sense way said, "Well, all these people here have paid money to hear the speakers." And then the man said to Swami Kriyananda, "Well, you don't have to be defensive." And Swami walked back up to the microphone and just smiled at the man and the crowd, and he said, "Well, the defense rests," and then walked back and sat down. And when we don't exist, what is there to defend? What is there to protect? Anandi was walking back with one of the staff members from Expanding Light, and somebody had done something with the program that wasn't to her sense of maybe how it should have been, and they were walking together, and Swami said, "Well, what's your problem? You don't exist." And this is something very, very good to tell ourselves when anything happens. I don't exist. God exists. God's joy exists. But I don't exist. And the more that we can feel that and affirm that, the more it will be a stronger principle and realization in our life, a growing one. A saint used this analogy of let's say we walked into a church and there was a beautiful, priceless organ in this church, and we see the organ, and we've never played the organ, or maybe we have played it, but not very well. And so we decide to play this organ, and very inharmonious music would be, of course, played by us. And he said it's much, much better to wait for the master organist of the church to come and have them play. And then the music will really touch our hearts and will touch the hearts of everyone. And so to be able to get ourselves out of the way, to be able to really let God's song flow through us and sing through us. in the new Nayaswami order, Swami talks about the old way was was more world negating through self-abasement, to deny the ego. But he said it's much more positive to expand the ego, a sense of who we are. You know, the ego is not really our enemy, because the ego always is having us seeking for something better. It's just that the ego is misguided, thinking that it'll get its joy in small things. And it's really the ego that really drives us towards eventually attunement with God. Well, I was in the early days, my early days at Ananda. I started traveling around during programs, and I stopped by at this Trappist monastery. And there was one brother there who told me that, I was whipping myself with a whip, and then I thought, why am I doing this? And the whip just flew out of my hands, and I never picked it up since. And that's the old way. But when we beat ourselves up by not doing something that we feel that we shouldn't be doing, that is still that same movement of just really beating ourselves up. And the most important thing is to not identify with our littleness, but identify with our greatness. This is why meditation is so important. Meditation is a dedicated practice of tuning into God or one of His attributes of love or light, of peace. In Hong Sa, every time we do the Hong Sa technique, we're getting to know God as stillness. We're getting to know the stillness of our soul. Every time we just observe our breath, what are we doing? We're saying, I'm not my body. It's the flow of life flowing through me. Every time we let a thought go and don't build on to that thought, what are we doing? We're saying, I'm not this personality. I'm much greater than this just individualized thing, my personality. Every time we do the Om technique, what we're doing is we're transferring the seed of self-awareness that's anchored in the negative pole of the sixth chakra, the point of the ego, and when we start to hear Om, it breaks out from that point, and our awareness comes through into our whole body, and it breaks the hold of the ego. Every time that we do Kriya Yoga, we're experiencing God as a God of joy, and we've transferred our awareness from the world of matter to the world of spirit. And so we're getting in touch with that greater reality, and we realize, as Swami talked about with the Om, you realize that you witness a greater reality, and you realize that you are part of that reality. So in a very, very real way, we start to experience what our true nature is. And so this is why Swami has said that meditation is so important to the order, because it really gives that sense of expanding the ego in a very, very real way. But then the path of Ananda is not only the path of meditation. We sometimes wish it was. We've had lots of lives where we've lived a quiet, simple life. But this is a time for sharing, for all the gifts that we have been given in past incarnations. It's a time for meditation still, but it's a time of giving to the world, of bringing deep spiritual truths out into the world. I had a friend who was visiting from Brazil, and she was camped out in the meadow of the expanding light. Her name is Roberta. And Master came to her during the night in her little tent in a vision. And he didn't say, go live in the forest, live a life of solitude, and seek only me. The one word he said was give. And and this is a time of giving, of taking what we've been given, not only in our life here, but in our lives, past lives, all the understanding, all the grace, the quiet meditations, the time sitting by the river as a sadhu, and to really share with the world. And Swami has talked about that it's hard or challenging for yogis to be out in modern life, but the more that we do, the more that we are a channel for that, the greater we'll be blessed, and the growth will be very tremendous. We part of asserting and identifying with the big self is to always think big. Whenever we walk around Ananda, we may have a chant going, a prayer going, a thought to God, our devotion, but we should. If we find ourselves thinking of projects and the busy mind chattering, to think big. Swami says to gaze at the distances in the horizon and let your aura fill that space, your sense of who you are, feeling that you're sailing with the clouds. You can also feel that the sun is Om. Lahiri Mahashai said that the sun is the most tangible form of Om because it enlivens all life, and just see everything as an expression of Om around you, and that you are too. But to just try to have that sense of largeness, and then we'll be doing both. We'll be denying our little self, and we'll be expanding into our great self. Okay. Bless you.
I was caught up in ecstasy. 'Twas a day sanctified by God. There He showed me the truths of heaven, truths which all seeking Him should know. How the soul made to live in freedom can reclaim its eternal right. How the night, born of our delusions, can be fired, blazing with His light.